You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise and Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's get you caught up on the woman who, along with her boyfriend, murdered her mom overseas. She has now been sentenced for that murder in America. All right, jazz musician James Mack, who was born in 1929, came from humble beginnings. His single mother worked as a maid to support James and his brother. When James was 5 years old, the three, so his mother, his brother, and him, moved to Chicago from Alabama. When James was 5, he listened to classical music for the first time on his family radio. Friends say that changed his life forever. He continued to love music, and when he was 15, he joined the high school band. The instructor allowed him to choose between playing the flute or the tuba, and a young James theorized the flute was easier to play. He had in fact chosen the much harder musical instrument, but he mastered it. Loving music, he went on to earn a bachelor's and master's degree in music from Roosevelt University. And from there, his wealth was introduced because James could do just about anything in music. He could conduct an orchestra. He could compose the music, produce the talent, and arrange the songs that were sung by the talent. But his true love was teaching music, and in his later years, he was a professor at Harold Washington College, where students would line up to take his classes. Now, during his life, James was married 3 times. The first 2 ended in divorce, but he was blessed with 4 daughters and a son. And then James married Sheila Ann Von Weiss. She's a woman who came from high class, but to be quite honest, that high class was really cultivated by her. She was born in Michigan, and she attended Simmons College in Boston, where she majored in political science. She then got her MBA from Washington University in St. Louis, and she had worked her whole life. And she even worked after marrying James, who had immense wealth. And even up until she died, she continued to work for the publishing company Doubleday. Well, during her college years, she worked for Ted Kennedy, which allowed her to become familiar with the Kennedy family. For a brief spell, she also worked for Jackie Kennedy. But it was music that brought James and Sheila together. Sheila's father was a composer, and the two crossed over in certain circles. Now, Sheila and James, who had a 22-year age difference, had just one child together. Louise Heather Mack was born in 1995 when Sheila was 43 years old. And this little family, who got a late start with mom in her 40s and dad in his 60s, well, they had some difficulties despite their fame and wealth. In 2001, James was injured on a cruise through the Mediterranean. His lack of care on that ship caused James to suffer from partial paralysis. For 10 years, the lawsuit between him and the cruise line ate up time and energy. Well, the home life, it wasn't that fabulous all that time either. Specifically in 2004, when the police were called because the children from James' previous relationship, well, they weren't being allowed into the home on multiple occasions. It seems when the adult children would show up to visit their father, Sheila would turn off the lights and not answer the door. So we've got that contention. Then there's rumors of contention between James and Sheila. And then there's Heather, who is hitting her preteen years and becoming quite the handful for her mother. In 2006, James, Sheila, and Heather went on a vacation to Greece. James was in his mid-70s, and he's still suffering from that foot injury. Well, during that trip, James suffered another blow. This was a pulmonary embolism in the hotel room, and he died. Heather is 11, and her life has had multiple ups and downs, wealth and privilege, but also contention, and now her father dies. And to highlight that contention amongst just about everyone in this group, a new will was established 5 days before the family went on that vacation to Greece, where James died. In the new will, Heather was to be awarded all of James' estate. That would exclude the other children and Sheila. But Heather's a minor, and she and her mother nurture this very codependent and argumentative relationship for the next 8 years. So one particular issue that lingered between the two is that when the cruise line finally awarded $500,000 to the estate of James Max, that's following that lawsuit we were talking about, the money was supposed to be set aside for Heather. But Sheila took that case to court, and a judge decided that the money should go to Sheila. But they found other things to fight about besides the court case. In the years following James' death, police were called to the Mack home on 86 occasions. 86, you guys. So sometimes it would be violent encounters between Sheila and Heather. Sometimes it was because Heather would just disappear for days at a time. Sometimes it was over Heather stealing from her mother or not obeying the rules that Sheila had put in place for Heather. Okay, during one of the calls in 2010, Heather was accused of punching her mother's broken ankle and then stealing $1,000 in cash. In another call in 2011, Heather actually broke her mother's arm during a dispute. But it gets worse. After causing the harm to her mother's arm, Heather removed the phones in the home so that Sheila couldn't call for help. Then months after the arm breaking incident, police were called again because Heather was threatening to physically harm Sheila. And then the next year, during an argument, Heather bit Sheila, causing visible damage. But in almost all of these cases, Sheila would backtrack and not ask for charges to be filed. And as each year went on, Heather's outbursts just got more frequent and more outrageous because she was becoming an independent teen, and it was harder for Sheila to enforce rules. But Sheila also let Heather assert her dominance, not wanting to deprive her of the things that Heather was asking for. When Heather was a senior at the affluent Oak Park High School, this is just outside of Chicago, she began dating a young man 2 years older than her. As Heather developed the relationship with Tommy Schaefer, Sheila became even more frustrated. She didn't like Tommy. He was a budding and currently unsuccessful rapper with the stage name Tommy X. Now, all three, they're fighting, and Sheila decides that a change of residence might help everyone. So Sheila sells their home in Oak Park and moves her and Heather to a high-rise condo in the Gold Coast neighborhood in Chicago. Unfortunately, Heather's going to do what Heather wants to do, and she moves in and out of the condo depending on how her relationship with Tommy is going. And during that time, Heather tells people she becomes pregnant twice with Tommy's babies, and that Sheila forces her to abort both pregnancies. And then she becomes pregnant a third time. And according to Heather, Sheila is insisting that this pregnancy be terminated as well. Okay, it's important to understand that the pregnancy had not been verified yet. That third pregnancy, it was early on. But Sheila, seeming fed up, she contacts a lawyer to try and set up a power of attorney so that she can determine Heather's health care. Now, all of this is happening in a short span of time in early August of 2014, while Heather is 19 years old. And for some of you listening, you might be thinking about how you were doing your own thing at 19. You're out on your own. You're paying for your own way in life. That's not even close to what's going on here. Heather and Sheila are codependent. Heather clearly needs Sheila to continue living at the level she is used to appreciating. And I say that with air quotes around appreciate because she isn't grateful for the luxury that she has. But Sheila keeps providing it while trying to help Heather make decisions that Sheila thinks are going to benefit her life. You know, like getting rid of Tommy and not becoming a mother at age 19. Well, in a last-ditch effort, Sheila books a trip to Bali, Indonesia for her and Heather. And according to Sheila's friends, they begged her not to take Heather on the trip. Her friend Mark said that Heather was a handful. She had dropped out of college without her mother knowing, and she was living in a separate apartment and was hanging out with a questionable crowd. And that crowd included Tommy. Now, Mark told NBC News that 4 or 5 of Sheila's friends had told her to permanently kick Heather out, to just cut her off. But he said it was difficult for Sheila because Heather could be self-effacingly sweet one moment and then a vicious little monster the next minute. And I think Mark was onto something because Heather stole her mother's credit card and booked a $12,000 flight for Tommy to Bali. Okay, this trip was supposed to be about getting Heather away from the bad influences that Sheila felt were affecting Heather. But Heather's on-again, off-again boyfriend showed up in Bali on Sheila's stolen dime. And I'm going to say boyfriend is really a loose term here. These two don't have a Romeo and Juliet love. I'm not even sure he was much of anything except someone who would use her and show up on occasion. Well, on August 12th of 2014, this is just days after arriving in Bali, security cameras catch Sheila and Tommy arguing in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel. Once they realize people are watching, they retreat from the lobby and they each head to their rooms. And it seems Sheila went to bed, and Heather and Tommy start planning. And it gets violent. Heather lets Tommy into Sheila's room, and Tommy grabs a decorative metal fruit bowl and begins beating Sheila with it. As Sheila is fighting back, Tommy continues hitting the 62-year-old woman so violently, she dies from the beating. And the scramble by Heather and Tommy begins. They manipulate Sheila's dead body into a large suitcase. And then that next morning, they bring that suitcase, along with a couple of other suitcases, down to the taxi station in front of the luxury hotel. After engaging with a taxi driver saying they were leaving the hotel, and then after loading the suitcases into the trunk of the taxi, Heather and Tommy head back into the hotel. Now, the hotel staff is asking the two to remain in the resort while they track down Sheila. But since when does Heather listen to requests? The two sneak out of the hotel through the beach entrance, and they use credit cards linked to Sheila to book a hotel further on down the beach. And Sheila's body remains in the trunk of the taxi for 2 hours while staff tries to locate her. Now, workers are getting edgy, and the taxi driver opens the trunk to check the bags. That's when a worker notices blood dripping from one of the bags. They don't touch it. Instead, the driver leaves the hotel and drives directly to the police station. And it's there that authorities discover Sheila's battered and dead body in the suitcase. One day later, police arrest Tommy and Heather at the hotel down the beach. Their story? Well, they said thieves had attacked Sheila and that they were able to escape the robbers. So, if they wanted the authorities to believe that story, how did they explain that Sheila ended up in the suitcase? And why did they bring that suitcase down to the taxi station and then just leave? Well, while in custody in Bali, awaiting their American lawyers to show up in Indonesia, Heather is moved to a special unit at the jail where she is tested to see if she is pregnant, like she's claiming. Well, she was. And then the two were charged with the murder of Sheila. Within a month of being in the Bali jail, Tommy admits to killing Sheila and Heather. Within a month of being in the Bali jail, Tommy admits to killing Sheila, and Heather admits to helping him dispose of the body. Now, per Indonesia law, the two could have been killed by firing squad for the murder of Sheila. But the judge went especially lenient on Heather because she was now close to delivering her child with Tommy. Heather was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and Tommy was sentenced to 18 years. And you guys are going to think this is a light sentence because it came out just a little over 1 year after the murder that Heather was developing a plot to kill Sheila. Heather had offered $50,000 to Tommy if he would kill her mother. Now, this all came out when Tommy's cousin was charged in America for consulting with Tommy about how to pull off the murder. And then in a series of text exchanges between Heather and Tommy, they discussed on the morning of the murder how they were going to kill Sheila. You guys, they even had a code phrase that they used. When they would refer to the potential murder, they would type saying hi. And they also refer to themselves as Bonnie and Clyde in those text exchanges. Well, Heather gives birth while incarcerated to a beautiful baby girl she names Estella. Now, little Stella lives in the prison with her mother for the first 2 years of her life, much to the disgust of Tommy. He begs the authorities to send the child back to America, but Stella remains in Indonesia. And after she turns 2, she is given to an Indonesia woman who will raise Stella until her mother is released from prison. And that release happens early. Because of good behavior, Heather was released in late 2021, this after serving 7 of her 10-year sentence. But it wasn't over for Heather or Stella. As she returned to the United States, she was quickly arrested by the FBI at the Chicago airport for murdering her mother. So, one thing here. Poor little Stella. She spends her first 2 years in a prison. Then she lives with and probably bonds with a woman named Oshar. And then Heather is released and the two head to America. And then her mother is incarcerated again and she is given to Heather's cousin to be raised. All of these things happen to little Stella in the first 6 years of her life. And then the last 2 years have trudged by as the court system held hearing after hearing about Heather. Then finally last week, Heather was sentenced in America for killing her mother. As she sat in the courtroom in her orange jumpsuit and her glasses, she stayed pretty stoic while victims were allowed to discuss how the death of Sheila had haunted them for the last 9 years. When the judge finally allowed Heather to speak, she said that the volatile relationship between her and her mother, well, she said that shouldn't be considered in the sentencing hearing. She told the judge she was now a different person and that she recognizes herself as the mother of an 8-year-old girl who she deeply loves. She also went on to apologize to her aunt and uncle who testified earlier in the hearing, and then she ended everything she had to say by adding that she loved and missed her mother. Well, after hearing from the cousin taking care of Stella, and also from the aunt and uncle, and a therapist that had worked with Heather while she's been incarcerated, the judge sentenced Heather to 26 years in prison for conspiring to kill her mother during their planned trip to Bali. The judge did give her credit for time served in Bali, so it is expected that Heather will serve almost 20 years in either an Illinois prison or possibly a Colorado prison. See, Heather's attorneys are arguing for the sentence to be served in Colorado. This because that's where Stella is living with Heather's cousin. And if agreed upon, Stella might be able to visit her mother during the next 20 years. All right, let's tie up one loose end. We've got Stella in good hands. Tommy's still in prison in Bali, and he'll face charges in America once he is released. Heather's now in prison for possibly 20 years. But what happened to the inheritance? Well, Heather has been ordered to pay back more than $262,000 that she received in her trust fund while she was incarcerated in Bali. And Stella has been named as the sole beneficiary of James and Sheila's estate. Stella's new guardian says that Stella has learned to ride a bike and to ski. She's gone camping. She's attended birthday parties and play dates and sleepovers. She's learned to play basketball and softball. All of this since coming to America in 2021. And at the court hearing, Sheila's brother encouraged people to remember Sheila for the beautiful attributes that she embodied, instead of as the woman who was murdered and stuffed into a suitcase. He said Sheila read more books than anyone he had ever known. He said she loved classical music and opera. He told the judge she was thoughtful and that she loved to learn. You guys, it's not over for Stella. If her father returns to America, all of the last 2 years will be done over again. I truly hope something of a normal life can continue for this girl. Okay, 2 quick updates to cases I've previously brought you. First, remember the case of the young woman who died from drinking the caffeinated lemonade at Panera Bread, and her family is suing the alternative healthy dining business? Well, That lawsuit hasn't been settled yet, but 2 other lawsuits have been filed against Panera Bread. All right, last week, Lauren Scarrett filed suit against the restaurant chain. The 28-year-old occupational therapist was an active and healthy former athlete, but she says on April 8th of 2023, she drank 2.5 restaurant-sized glasses of Panera's charged lemonade. Since that date, she says she has had persistent heart palpitations, and she was even rushed to the hospital just 1 day after drinking the charged lemonade because she was experiencing symptoms from atrial fibrillation. Okay, and that's nothing to mess around with. Irregular heartbeats, or atrial fib, leads to over 150,000 deaths each year. But did the charged lemonade cause that? Lauren's lawsuit contends, yes, that the lemonade has caused her to experience supraventricular tachycardia with shortness of breath. She also says she has heart palpitations, brain fog, difficulty thinking and concentrating, body shakes, and weakness. So, how much caffeine is in a charged lemonade? Well, each drink contains 390 milligrams of caffeine per 30 ounces. So that's about 4 times the amount of a cup of coffee, and Lauren drank 2.5 of those. Now, the other lawsuit that has been filed involves a 46-year-old Florida man named David Brown, who drank 3 glasses of the charged lemonade. After visiting the restaurant and while walking home, David suffered a cardiac arrest and died. His family filed suit blaming Panera Bread for advertising themselves as a healthy restaurant to dine in, but they then serve a dangerous drink without proper warning. Panera Bread has described both death suits as without merit, and they have yet to comment on Lauren's lawsuit. My takeaway? If you're a Panera Bread fan, maybe drink charged lemonade with caution. And I offer the last update today for somewhat selfish reasons because of all the cases that I have researched since starting this podcast last May. The Uvalde shooting has stuck with me the most. I couldn't sleep for several days after bringing you that case on August 10th of last year. I would recommend listening to that episode if you really want the details about the botched response by law enforcement that left 19 children and 2 teachers dead from a lone gunman. Well, we received news last week that a grand jury has been convened to determine if any law enforcement officers should face criminal charges in connection with the mass shooting. This is on the heels of a scathing Department of Justice report that found a series of cascading failures of leadership, decision-making, tactics, and policy and training failures. The DOJ report said that the botched law enforcement effort led to victims experiencing unimaginable horror, and that those left alive witnessed unspeakable violence. The 575-page report spent significant time exploring the failure in taking courageous action on that May of 2022 school day. Officers just stood outside the door of the active shooting for more than 40 minutes without taking any action. The report also highlighted how families were told that the actions of law enforcement were actually filled with bravery. Yet just days later, video was released that showed otherwise. These videos included showing a first responder checking his phone, and then another first responder using the hand sanitizer dispenser while children were locked in a room with an active shooter. Now, the report said that these videos caused even more trauma to the victims' families. And the report also revealed that some families were given completely false information about how their loved one died. And then other families were told their loved one died, yet their loved one actually didn't die. Like I said, this case was filled with so much tragedy. I'll keep you updated on the grand jury findings. I truly, truly hope justice can be served for these families. Well, that's your Monday episode of Rise and Crime. You guys, I can't even tell you how appreciative I am of the support that you have provided for this podcast on all of the various platforms. I always want to know what you think about the cases, and I want to hear your case suggestions. And if you love what you're hearing, you can always give Rise in Crime a like or a follow, and please subscribe. And then also tell a friend. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.